Hello, everybody, and welcome to Still Uncaptured, your favorite podcast with me, Khomotso Matsunyane.
And myself, Undumiso Iqadi Lagwangzobo.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. As you can see, it's winter. I'm warm.
Yep.
But also sweaty as a hog.
I'm not.
As
it's warm in here.
As hot as a prosperity preacher on a month-end Sunday, which is a beautiful segue into the conversation because you end up sweating.
It is, but I wanted to start it off a little different. First, let's introduce our guest.
All right, so we have right next here in studio. Because you want to hear my pronunciation
He's going to butcher it.
Pontsho. No, we were to Pontsho Pilane. What's interesting is that her partner, his pronunciation is even worse than mine.
Really?
He is significantly more Zulu than I am. Pontsho, wears many hats, but we are here with her because she has penned this this wonderful book. I'm just going to leave it here until they train in on it. Power and Faith: How Evangelical Churches are Quietly Shaping Our Democracy. Welcome to Still Uncaptured.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
Yeah. And congratulations on writing the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a feat and a half.
I can imagine, but no, mostly because it's so personal.
Yeah.
You really have to dig in, and I can imagine that was possibly one of the most difficult things because it's real, it's not fiction, and it happened to you, and you kind of name people and churches.
Well, legally, I don't name churches. I call it the family.
The family.
Because
It's the family.
I didn't want any legal, issues because the church is known to legally go after people. So it was a strategic and legal reason. I think in the beginning of the book, I wanted to name them. But seeing how they treated other dissenters, I just knew that it was not going to be worth it.
Right.
Those who know.
Those who don't know.
No, the genesis of this book, because I read it, and I read it in two. And I remember I read up until page 85, without stopping, and I kind of, I was busy, and then I read. But it was like such an intense book. When you set out, what's the genesis of this book? What were you setting out to do other than just writing your life story, particularly when it comes to religion?
Yeah, so the first part why I wanted to write this book was more from a journalistic point of view, right? The things I discovered as I was a health journalist and focusing on sexual reproductive health. So that's what I thought the book was going to be. And then I realized that it would not be a good book without showing the personal ways in which the public stuff that happens is impacted. So I was what we call deconstructing my faith, right? So it was about 5 or so years into deconstructing my faith. And I was having a lot of revelations, for lack of a better word. And I just thought to merge those two stories because a lot of the times people who identify as born again, Bazalwane, evangelical, don't realize their personal complicity to the big Trump stuff, to the big policy stuff, to the things that shape our democracy. So I used my personal story as a vehicle to show the intersection of those two places where your personal beliefs, even if you're not the one who is manipulating the public and lobbying for abortion laws to be changed in parliament, you support a pastor or you pray with people who believe exactly that. And just those two things. And that was the hard part, writing about these deeply personal things. But I didn't think I could do that without really going into the deeply personal so that people can relate. And this is why I also dedicate the book to people who have left, but also people who are maybe battling and are still in the church and have questions.
Yeah.
But it's not like they also make it easy when you leave.
Yeah, they don't. Leaving is hard. And I think what helped me leave was that I had an internal resistance to a lot of the controlling nature of the church. So things like keeping your life only with born-again Christians. I had Muslim friends. I had friends from what we call our BC days, before Christ, right?
Yeah.
So I never really, even though there was sometimes distance between my BC friends and I never really let go of those friendships and those relationships. So it kept me grounded, or with what Christians would call being lukewarm, because I was not efficiently Christian to a point where I completely isolated my life according to the church and the church community. Also because I'm me. I was in a poetry club, like being on campus and being involved in very artsy things really also protected me against into this thing in a way that other people do, and then leaving is hard because it means you're leaving completely your whole life behind.
Because it was so fascinating when we were describing this, because I think that what you are essentially, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is your intellectual space and your personality was a bit of a buffer that protected you. Because one of the images that really, for me, because I love imagery, is when you talk about this one time where you were we go to talk about committing yourself to Jesus Christ, when you were recommitting yourself again and again, and you were actually wearing a T-shirt that came from your other part of your life. I think you were wearing a sondeza.com T-shirt with like a picture of
I died. I'm like, first of all, she had a sondeza.com T-shirt. If you don't know what Sondeza is, Sondeza was a porn site.
Please
local.
Put respect on Sondeza.
The first one.
The first South African.
In the early 2000s, right?
Porn site, yes. In South Africa. What happened to it?
With an image of fellatio actually on the T-shirt.
Yes.
While you were there.
Yeah, that's the first time. The second time I got saved in a church, because the first time I got saved was in a home cell. And for me, because of that acceptance, that's why I thought this was real. How could this girl in a Sondeza blowjob T-shirt stand in front of God and get accepted by this community? But that's what they do, because come as you are, right? So that you are transformed within.
Yes.
So the coercion doesn't start it can start at the altar call, but there's this deep acceptance of a full acceptance that you experience during altar call, and that's how they lure you in.
And then they trap you in there.
And then they trap you in there. You and I now, and of course yourself, a lot of experience of traditional Christian denominations. I grew up in the Catholic Church. So did you. You went to Catholic school.
I went to a Catholic school, but we're a Dutch Reformed church
and so on. The question that I want to ask you about that is that when now it comes to, one of the first things you say in the introduction is that you were part of a religious cult. And I had to go back and back to read that all over again. It's like, what is the difference? Because as a Catholic, I've been told so many times, people just say, no, you are also Catholic. You are also part of a cult. It's just that it's a much more sophisticated, bigger cult. But when you say religious cult, what do you mean?
I mean a high control religion. That's one of academics have put 5 ways of describing a cult. But one of the main characteristics is high control. And that's, for me, where I had to reckon with being in a cult, because there's so much high control. And the thing about evangelicals as compared to maybe fundamentalist Pentecostal people is that it looks cool. The high control is self-surveillance. It's not necessary. Of course, there is the external surveillance, but it's more about you being under this control without anybody putting you under surveillance. So you put yourself under surveillance. And that's the one thing for me that made me say I'm in a cult. That's the number one reason. And this the self-isolation, again, that a lot of us go through when you are in these churches is also another sign of a cult, because it's around think Jonestown. That was a physical isolation to Guyana from San Francisco, I think. But with the new mega church and evangelical model, there is almost a spiritual, mental, emotional isolation that happens. And I think it's not talked about enough. And this is why a lot of evangelical churches get away with not being called cults. And it's the extreme ones, the doom, the eating of snakes, or Mboro's church, or like a certain kind of church, Bushiri's church, for instance, that will be said to be a cult because they have physical manifestations of this isolation. Whereas the churches in suburbia don't have it because of the cushion of being upwardly mobile, having money. But there is an internal self-isolation that happens, which results in the surveillance, and the high control comes from the fact that you don't do certain things because you relate those things to being outside of the idea of church and sinning.
But what I found fascinating is that you talk in the book about your anxiety, your extreme anxiety, and I can relate. And I was just looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, how did you manage to do that and manage that anxiety while you're dealing with the church, which was obviously putting so much pressure on you? First of all, you were working for free.
So much.
You had a full-time job.
And I was a student.
And you were a full-time student. And I mean, it speaks to your intellectual prowess that you kept passing and all that stuff. But I know, and Dimiso know that you're a brilliant person. But it was just mind-boggling to me of just like why people, and you hear it with the Scientologists, because recruitment in these churches is huge.
Yep.
And same with Scientology. But I think with all churches, recruitment is a pivotal part of it because they need new lamb to slaughter. They need more people to pay tithes. They need more people to look credible. And I thought, like, how did you manage?
Jesus was my crutch, right? I always say to people that the minute I went on anti-anxiety and anti-depression meds, that is the first time I got an awakening. Literally, I had a breakdown. I was in a mental health facility. I got on antidepressants and anxiety, and I was in there for a month. And when I came out, I was not the same. And I knew I was not the same. Like, it's almost like even though there were signs before or things that I was uncomfortable about, but it felt like a veil had just been lifted. So for a long time, I used church as a crutch for my anxiety. So if I felt anxious, I need to throw myself more into church. Less of me, more of you, Jesus, right? So to quell that anxiety. But the minute I actually dealt with the physical, issue, or rather the mental and emotional and metaphysical issues that were happening, I woke up. After coming out of that mental health facility, it was my relationship with the church, my understanding of God or gods was never the same ever again. And I think it was also therapy, like talking through all the traumas that led me to my breakdown as well, instead of just putting it away and like a festering wound. I actually had to confront that it was probably the first time I didn't go to church for 4 weeks in my entire life after I got saved. So in 6 years, being in that mental health institute was the first time I didn't go to church for 4 weeks consecutively since 2009.
She never likes my analogies. She always thinks they are weird. And I'm going to use one that might also be a bit weird for her, but I know you'll get it. Which is, because like she says, for you, it's a very deeply personal story, and you talk about it. And I do not want to put words in your mouth. So I'm going to say this to you, is that what in my reading and also what I have seen, the fact that you had anxiety spoke to a certain vulnerability about you, and that these churches particularly, they thrive, they specifically seek the people who are vulnerable, people who show some kind of weakness, because almost like predators and prey in the wild, because it's not as if lions just see a herd of buck and just go willy-nilly. They look for the one that is like limping. They're always looking for vulnerability. For you, did you feel, was that your experience of it, that you were targeted, and that what made you susceptible to it was precisely because you were vulnerable and you were weak?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most common model of evangelical mega churches, right? And I always caveat that by saying white-led evangelical mega churches, because there's a specific model they use.
Right.
Yes.
Is they go after young people, right? Firstly, your frontal cortex is not even developed yet,
Right.
and you're already being put there. For me personally, there had been a tragic car accident where people who were close to me had died. And my roommate, who I write about, my flatmate, who I write about, who was already in the church, invited me to Home Cell, where I got saved literally a week after we buried them. So there was already that vulnerability, that trauma of losing friends in this horrific accident. And also just, I think, my own other issues that I had, like the anxiety. So I was vulnerable. But the cynical thing about the vulnerability of the church or the recruitment is that a lot of the foot soldiers, right? The let's say the head lion, which is the senior pastors and all of that, know this mechanism of looking for those who are limping and who are vulnerable. But their foot soldiers, the actual people who do that work, don't know it. They do it in good faith. This is what makes it even worse, right? I think about myself when I was in the church. When I saw students suffering or going through stuff, I didn't invite them to the church like, ooh, I'm targeting you because you're weak. But that is the actual ethos that exists institutionally. But on an individual level, people actually think they're helping. I thought I was helping many people I recruited into the church.
Because Jesus was for the weak.
Yes.
It goes in line with biblical truth.
With the dogma.
Yes.
So now you meet someone like, there's two people that really had an impact on me when I was reading the book. One was Pastor Thabo. Let's talk about Pastor Thabo. He's quite a piece of work.
He's a horrible
I think that's
human
about the best I can say about him is that, wow. And he's one of those, you need generals to fight somebody's war.
He's a general.
Thabo is a general. He's like that person who's decided he's going to die for the empire.
Yes.
The one who asked you the question, Pontsho, are you black or Christian? It's like, are you black or Christian? Like,
I'm both. And I loved your answer. Because what did you expect you to say?
Exactly.
So speak to us a little bit more about...
The context already is that it was during Afrikaans Must Fall protests, right, in 2016. And the church had come out in their strongholds in Pretoria and in Bloemfontein to say, to run a colorblind campaign. Black and white pictures all over social media saying that this idea of trying to say Afrikaans must fall, the metaphoric meaning of Afrikaans must fall is divisive, and it's the reason there are protests on campus. And so I was very, for a lack of a better word, triggered by those posts, right? And so I just went on this tirade on Facebook, on social media. I was a journalist at the Mail and Guardian at that time. I wrote an op-ed and I was like, I covered the story in quite detail. And I think because he saw that, he decided, what I know happened from other people who are in the church, who are still close to me, is that my posts were brought up during a pastor's meeting. And Pastor Thabo volunteered to call me to understand where I was coming from. So, and to
understand where you were coming from, or to set you straight?
To set me straight.
Okay.
That's what he said in the pastor's meeting. That's apparently what he said. Allegedly, I don't know. But I was told that this was brought up in a pastor's meeting. The pastors were concerned about, this person who was a member of our church less than a year ago is criticizing us so much and so loudly, and she has a platform.
Right.
And then he volunteered himself to address me. And that was the first time since I had laid a formal complaint against Pastor Thabo at the church that we were talking. And that was the conversation.
And you were very adamant, and it's amazing that it's Feast Must Fall that actually led to you ultimately leading the church, because you thought you cannot separate the two struggles. You were fighting for the intersectionality of it, whereas they wanted you to choose. But you say that it's not as innocent as it seems, as if like, we are the world, we're just one people, and it's all fine, that there is a political element. If you look particularly later in the book, when you talk about the effect on general reproductive health, policy issues, that you can see where the line is drawn, to be like, you can start it in the United States of America, and you can see with the Republicans, you can see with the churches, sort of like, but there's an agenda here. Donald Trump just made sure the Supreme Roe versus Wade is completely overturned.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought. I mean, I went to school in the United States, right? Roe versus Wade was one of those things that you heard about that was like, wow, what a progressive nation. I come back to South Africa, the ANC, bless them. They say, we will make sure that women have full reproductive rights for themselves, and it passes, right? Which is like fantastic. But there is this agenda of churches and conservatives who really don't want us to be there. And you make this link in your book.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to write the book, like I said earlier on, right? And for me, it was sitting in a policy dialogue around decriminalization of sex work and listening to people who sounded like me 2 years ago talk about how they think they're saving sex workers and this paternalistic tone, right? And reading up on them that, sitting there that you actually think you're saving these people to an extent where a law and a policy that is being put in place to protect their rights and their human dignity, you're opposing it based on your morality.
Right.
Yeah.
It hit me like a ton of bricks. And that was my first aha moment in terms of connecting the personal spiritual journey with the greater political project. And then 2017 happened. Trump, came into the White House in Trump 1.0. And the first thing he does is he reinstates the global gag rule, that impacts everyone across the world.
Please explain the global gag rule for those who may not know.
Yes. So the global gag rule is this law in the US that says no foreign aid. So the money that the US gives to other countries.
Used to give.
Now.
Well.
Used to give to other countries cannot be used to promote, to refer, or to perform terminations of pregnancies, right? But what Trump did, and why it was so much more devastating than every Republican president had done before him since Ronald Reagan, is he extended it to PEPFAR money. PEPFAR is the AIDS Relief Fund, right? And so for the very first time, we saw, and also what was different with Trump's iteration of the global gag rule was that the foreign NGOs or governments that were getting this money can't even use money from other pots to perform, to refer, or to promote abortion. So if Ndumiso is the US and you are Sweden or whatever, I can't even use the Swedish money to do that work.
So you're basically putting a stop to the work completely.
Completely.
Now bringing it back home, because this is very important, and I'll take it back to your applauding the ANC, correctly so, and I think that they deserve it.
True.
Because the ANC, honestly speaking, at CODESA, they fought for these rights, which is why they put them in the Bill of Rights, so that it would require a 2/3 majority to actually change and all of it, right? So 2 things, right? Going back to are you black or Christian, Pastor Thabo, coupled with what you are saying about praising the ANC, correctly so. What's interesting is that I guarantee you right now that if there were to be a vote right now in the National Assembly, it would be a struggle to enshrine those rights now, which speaks to the erosion of that kind of thinking that used to exist within the ANC back in the early 90s to how we got here, because it speaks about how it has shaped our democracy, that every single government, events start with prayer. With meetings start with prayer. Where we came from, Mandela, who would insist that there would never be just Christian prayer only in a government institution. There's got to be a rabbi, there's got to be a Hindu. Speak about how all of this, the rise of evangelical churches has actually influenced us here in South Africa in terms of our thinking.
So I like what you just said, and I have a different take. I think it would pass, but it wouldn't pass because people are pro-abortion. It would pass because the ANC as an institution and the policies that they've put in place would supersede people's personal beliefs. You understand? The institution and this legacy that we're talking about.
That's a very good thing,
So it wouldn't pass because of people's MPs' personal beliefs. It would pass based on this history that we're talking about, the historical context, and the fact that the ANC knows it can't do that. It would hurt them so much, right? And also because of public health. So one of the critiques I have about our approach to sexual reproductive health and rights is that we focus on health and very little on rights, right? So when you look at the parliamentary, and this is one of the things I did for the book, I went back to the parliamentary records of when the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act was debated in Parliament, right? The majority of the arguments were for public health reasons and not for the bodily autonomy of women. And that makes a big difference. It was rightfully so about Black women's maternal mortality. Rightfully so. But in retrospect, being here now, looking at what's happening in the world, should we have fought for a rights-based approach more? I think so.
Hold that thought. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Still Uncaptured. We're in conversation with the author, Pontsho Pilane, who is writing about power and faith, a fascinating book about the influence of Pentecostal, white-led churches in South Africa. So, Pontsho, we hear news sometimes, and sometimes like right now, what's happening in Burkina Faso, everybody's like, Traoré. At some point, people are like, Kagame, because apparently in Rwanda, you are not allowed to, or you cannot start a church unless you have a higher degree in theology. Do you think that that's something that South Africa should consider?
I think we need to consider the CRL Commission, and in this moment, I'm blanking on what the C, the R, and the L. I know it's religious, cultural, religious, and linguistic commission, something like that. It's quite a long, but basically the custodians of ensuring that churches run correctly, right, in South Africa. I think they are a dog with no teeth. There've been so many commissions, and there was this big report on how to deal with the exploitation of people. It focused on commercial exploitation, which I believe was also an oversight, again, because it goes beyond the commercial. It goes beyond the commercial. But they focused on that. And we saw again now, saying just recently now, after Omotosho was acquitted, that they're starting another commission. But were the results and recommendations from the commission from 2017 fulfilled?
Yeah.
But that's how we work in South Africa, right?
Exactly.
Commission after commission, don't really see any tangible results. But people, I guess, feel better when you say there's a commission or somebody's getting paid.
I mean, the TRC, the work of the TRC was done and dusted, almost 30 years ago. Have any of the recommendations of the TRC
Yeah.
actually ever been followed?
Yeah.
This is the country that we're in.
But I think South Africans would actually revolt. The average Christian, if you told them that, particularly batsamayang dikereke tsa batho ba ba sa rutegang.
Ba di
Bo
tent.
moro ba, ba di tent. You know what I mean? I think like the populace would think like, what are you thinking? Like, lebitso la Modimo ha le tle fela ko batho ba ba rutegileng. So you're being discriminatory in a way. That's my suspicion. What do you think?
You know what? I think that the power of this book, which is why it's so important, which is why Pontsho hasn't signed my copy. I'm going to actually ask her to sign it for my brother, who happens to be an ordained Catholic priest,
Right.
who I know will actually love reading it. He will enjoy. He will love reading it.
Yes, but he's intelligent
I know.
he enjoys academic rigor.
I know, but this is the point that I'm actually driving at, which is the thing about it is that the type of religion that I, for instance, grew up in when I was a student, when I was out at varsity, where we were championing, under the tutelage of Sister Bernard Ncube, Father Smangi Mkhatshwa, Father Albert Nolan, when we were doing liberation theology, Jesus the Liberator, and so on. What has been fascinating for me as someone who, and I'll be honest about this because I am a Catholic that has fallen by the wayside, is how all of this that you are talking about has insidiously crept into even your traditional churches, where I don't hear too many people talk about liberation theology, even within the Catholic Church, because it speaks to how the evangelical churches that you're talking about, but almost by definition, they are on the right of the political spectrum. But how have they influenced, other denominations? Because I am finding that the religious fervor that I am now experiencing is decidedly very, very right.
Yeah. No, they've influenced it a lot. In fact, I was talking to someone just about 2 weeks ago who was talking about their very denominational church and how they went home recently and went to church, and they're just shocked at how Pentecostal it has become.
It's become, I'm sorry, I'm using a word from the 90s because that's where I come from. It's become quite happy-clappy.
Yes.
It really has.
And you must, it's a resource war, right? Research shows that denominational churches have not grown, but Christianity has grown, and evangelical Pentecostal has grown more. So we see a lot of people leave denominational traditional churches for evangelical churches.
Exactly.
And so there's a fusion of these. And I think some denominational churches find themselves between a rock and a hard place, where if they don't adapt to the cultural aesthetics and sensibilities of evangelical churches, then they will lose more people, especially young people, who are most likely to be upwardly mobile because of where we are as a country.
Sure. Because when you're young and in your church and you are in the traditional Catholic church and you're just kneeling, standing up, doing this and whatever, versus being
in a rock concert.
In a rock concert.
Yeah.
Like Bo Hillsong,
Yes,
know?
I mean, that's the church
And you
my
talk about
former
music a
church
lot.
was modeled from, right? Exactly. And until the scandal started, Brian Houston, who's the Hillsong founder, a couple of years ago, he was a regular at the church that I used to go to.
But there's so many of these scandals. Like I've been watching these Netflix documentaries, for example, the Hillsong. I saw, I think, on Netflix, and I'm just like, what is going on? Because there seems to be like quite a taking down.
Yes, because
of
it's about
sorts.
power.
You know who's next? TD Jakes.
Yeah, TDJ.
Because he was Puffy's friend. He
Yes.
hung out as just a little too much with Puffy.
I think there was a rumor just a couple of months ago that somebody came out accusing him of being with him. So there's just been a lot of kind of weird rumors around TD Jakes. But he's also recently officially given his church over to his daughter to be the lead pastor. So there's also that thing of these churches then become heirlooms.
Well, I was going to say, this is like a legacy project now.
Yeah.
Yes. Right? Like, so you give to your child. But let's be honest and let's be frank about it. The reason they can do this and why you can keep passing it on is because they make a ridiculous amount of money.
Yes.
Get chalete, like
it's a lot.
Get profit. So why would you give it to somebody else or like another priest or whatever? Yeah. No, you're kind of gonna keep it in the family. So how important is money?
Money is very important. I mean, the church I used to go to has a business people home cell. So home cell and spiritual guidance for people who are entrepreneurs, who are business people. And I'm not talking about skinny suit, hustlers. Yeah. I'm talking some of the most powerful business people in this country.
Right.
Went to this church.
Right.
They got seats in front. They had almost valet parking type of situations in church.
Yeah.
And they had
so there's a hierarchy.
Yes. Of course, yeah. And it was called it would not be called a hierarchy. It would be called honor. Right?
So some people are more honorable than others.
You wonder those things.
Have you read your Bible?
Priests and kings. There's a whole, they're priests and they're kings, right?
Right.
And so these Bible verses would be weaponized to make sense of this. So just the same way we have youth home cells, businessmen or business people play such a critical part in our society that they require special treatment. And it's also covered by the fact that there's a divorcee home cell. Right. There's a widow's home cell. So it just looks like this is a disaggregation according to your needs.
Meanwhile.
And not necessarily this thing of you are a place where we need to focus because you hold the resources. I'm talking like millionaires went to this church.
I think, don't you remember Bushiri buying his daughter a Ferrari?
Wasn't it a Maserati?
A 3-year-old. A 3-year-old.
Yeah.
A Maserati.
But who said God wants you to be poor? God wants you to be prosperous.
Prosperity gospel.
That's what the prosperity gospel is about.
I have a problem with prosperity gospel because it sells a pipe dream to really desperate and poor people.
Yeah.
You know, that if you're holy enough, if you believe in Jesus enough, if you pray enough, Pontsho.
If you sacrifice enough.
If you give everything to the church, then luena, eventually you'll be rich. And if not in this life, don't worry, girl, I got you covered in the next.
Yeah. It's also aspirational, right? On top of, and I think this is why South Africans, I think, are so preoccupied with Black mega churches, the Bushiris, the Snakes, the Doomed, because those target vulnerable, impoverished Black people. But I have a particular interest in white-led suburban mega churches because they target Black people, but upwardly mobile Black people. So, and this is why also in the book I talk about the corporatization of these churches, that their services are 90 minutes, run seamlessly, you are in and out. It's like corporate South Africa or the corporate world, right? So you have a CA going to this church. He's in and out. If he's not serving, he's in and out in 90 minutes. There's this efficiency that we can relate it, and that even I did, related it to whiteness. That, the whole day, I'm not there till 4 p.m.,
Right.
This is professional. I get to, when I gave as a student my bursary money into the building project at church to build 120 million rand building cash, my thing was I'll have AC, I'll sit in this amazing regulated environment, where the service is like smooth. It runs on, it's a call sheet, basically.
Right.
And
by 10 o'clock, refedite.
And for me, that was something, whereas if you think about it with Black impoverished people, most of them are unemployed. Or they have low income jobs. So where are they going to go after the service? They don't have social
It's a social club.
They don't have other things. They're not going to go out for lunch, to the mall, or, like what we do. So there's an aspirational thing that exists for impoverished Black people, but there's also an aspiration that happens for Black upwardly mobile people, and an aspiration to whiteness,
Right.
Yeah.
and capital.
Right.
So, so here's the thing, right? You speak in what you're describing. I've actually been into one of these churches. There's one out in Benoni where I was meeting someone for a script development thing, and she was part of one of these churches with everything, with a coffee shop, with a restaurant inside, with games, games rooms. You can go play ping pong, right? And I also know someone that, for me, whose life got absolutely derailed by one of these churches. And so I have a personal, and this person's life, like literally, she joined one of these churches and basically lost everything because she was using her own resources, because everyone was looking up to her to say, you are the ones that we should be looking up to. Now, I have 2 children that are at varsity, right? And speaking about impressionable minds and so on and so forth, right? Where one of my children just, said to me, it's like, no, I'm just going to this particular church. And everything you are describing is exactly what it's sounding
like.
more and more like. Because it also speaks to me about this issue. And I'm very fascinated by this, the concept of isolation. So isolation from your family, right? So that you are removed from your family. Because it reminds me of what this bishop, and I love him, he's one of my favorite theologians for an agnostic, I've got a favorite theologian, right? Archbishop Shelby Spong of the Episcopal Church of America, basically the Anglicans of America, who wrote a couple of books like Gospel. I've actually got some of the rescuing Christianity from fundamentalism, which I read in the mid-90s. Why Christianity Must Change or Die, Resurrection.
I think I know this author.
Yes. And he's the guy, basically a bishop, who basically said there's no such thing as hell. Because the church is in the business of control. So it's a reward punishment system.
Right.
You go to hell if you don't do what we do. But it speaks to the ethos of born again. Because born again is about saying you become an infant, which means that because you're a baby, you can be controlled.
Yes.
And I feel that there's someone actively on campuses going and recruiting all these kids while they are still young, particularly when they are first year. This was part of your experience?
Yes, I was the person collecting them, unknowingly so, right?
Yeah.
And I sometimes talk, even in the book, I talk about my complicity to the system and how I became a foot soldier of the system.
Yes.
It is deliberate. It is absolutely deliberate. One of the most common questions I get is from parents of Gen Z, whose kids are in university and are trapped.
I'm asking myself the question.
Trapped in these churches, or they can see, they read my book out of curiosity, and they can see the parallels with their own children, and they're like, how do I stop this before it gets to where it got for you? So it is not by coincidence they're on campus. It is by design. Because let me tell you something, right? I think about all the people I went to university with. One of them is now a CEO of one of the most successful corporates in South Africa. He still goes to that church. He started as an 18-year-old there.
Yeah.
So the return on investment is very high, especially for when churches strategically choose which universities to go to, because of the likelihood of that person becoming someone, quote unquote, in society.
It's almost like they're projecting your future.
Yes.
So you talk about universities, right? And you freaked me out by the fact that services that provide for reproduction are insidiously, without, you think, they say, are you pregnant? Do you need help? Come to us. You go there, and all they do is like show you pictures of your baby and so-called baby, right? And tell you, basically make you feel bad
Yes.
about having or wanting to terminate potentially. All they want is they'll tell you how you can give it up for adoption, and that's what they encourage.
Yes.
I mean, why don't they adopt all these kids that are in homes right now, these people?
you.
And so I was freaked out to say, imagine you're a college kid, you're 19 years old, you're 20, you're in varsity, you think you've gotten yourself pregnant and you think you might want to terminate, but you want to look at your options. And you go to a place where you think it would be safe. And then you get
and it's advertised on campus.
On campus.
And their offices are right opposite the campus, right?
Right.
So that
Right.
the
No,
clinic-
they're inside the campus.
clinic.
Literally, I
my
went to
God.
University of Pretoria. I can say this because I asked them for a right of reply in 2018.
Right.
Here's the campus clinic. Here. Like there's a little pathway, the next building. Here's this crisis pregnancy center that's operating within the university. And allegedly, the head nurse at the clinic sends the pregnant students there.
to be evangelized.
So they get the ones that they know
undercover.
who is pregnant for sure. Yeah. go on.
Yes. I went undercover at the very
That's
same crisis pregnancy center, but because I was already working, I didn't get access to campus. So I went to their little office that's outside of campus, the main office. And I was shown an inaccurate fetal size of my 9-week fake pregnancy. I was told I could be carrying the next Nelson Mandela. I was told about adoption. I was told every other option except termination, and I was discouraged. I still even have, sometimes I listen to that 2-hour session because I recorded it, and just the manipulation that went into it. And a crisis pregnancy center model is straight from the US. It's straight. You know, the woman who heads up all in 2020, there were 44 of these centers in South Africa. I counted recently, maybe like a month ago. There's now almost 60 in South Africa. So they've grown. The head, the one who oversees them, she has recently just come back from the USA to attend what is called the Heartbeat International Conference. Heartbeat International is the largest anti-abortion organization in the world. When I looked at the IRS records of Heartbeat International, you can see transactions directly to this organization in South Africa. So when I say these beliefs go beyond just your personal, you know, I don't believe in abortion, and goes into the public and political, social life of other people who have nothing to do with you. I mean that because I had lunch with that woman. I flew to Durban and I had lunch with her and I listened to her for 3 hours. She completely believes this. And they don't care that their tactics are unethical. They don't care that the information they provide is scientifically inaccurate.
Right.
They believe that, just like Jeremiah says, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you.
It's almost like Ted Cruz going and saying it's biblical that we should all bless Israel.
Right. No, but we've been asked to wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
I just need to I need you to wrap up by saying this because I think it's important. Is that number one, when you have got children that you can see are being vulnerable to this, but also, if we get this wrong and we actually allow this to go on, what are the dangers that we should be? What are going to be our Roe versus Wade recension moment here in South Africa if this goes unchecked?
I think our Roe v. Wade moment will not be legal, but it will be cultural and social. It will be the overzealous nurses that don't provide abortions because they can conscientiously object according to the guidelines for the termination of pregnancy in South Africa. I think it will be the security guard who stands at the clinic and when Tombi asks if abortions are performed here, because he is Christian, he's going to say no. That for me, I think, is the cost.
I hear you.
I always and
It's more dangerous.
it's more dangerous because it's
closer.
insidious. It's personal. And for me, what we need to do and what our law and policymakers need to do is guard against that.
Got it.
So can we create policies that stop conscientious objectors?
Yeah.
Because conscientious objection is not just saying, I don't want to perform an abortion for my religious beliefs. It also says I have the responsibility to refer someone.
To say, this is where you go.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
So that is my biggest fear.
Very last question. Are you still a Christian?
No. I'm a spiritual flexitarian.
Okay.
Ke topa fa, ke tlogela fa, ke topa fa, ke tlogela fa.
Same here. Go get the book, The Power and Faith. Remember, it is your right to terminate a pregnancy if you don't want it.
Yep.
It is your right. Until next time.